Have you ever wondered how an ordinary man, perhaps a peasant, who had never seen the sea, could become the absolute commander of a ship worth more than entire castles? In the 16th century, when the oceans were unexplored territories and every voyage was a leap into the unknown, this transformation was not only possible, it was a matter of survival. Imagine for a moment, it's 1520 at the port of Seville. The smell of tar mixes with the aroma of spices from the east, while dozens of men load provisions onto a carrack bound for the Indies. Among them is a young man of humble origins, illiterate, barely able to tell port from starboard. 15. Years later, this same man commands a fleet of 6 ships, holds life and death power over 200 crew members, and negotiates with kings from distant lands. How was this possible? The answer lies hidden in the wooden and iron guts of those giants of the seas, where an entirely new society was formed with each voyage. A society with its own laws, hierarchies, and opportunities, but also with deadly dangers and dark secrets. On 16th century ships, hierarchy was not just a matter of protocol or tradition, it was literally a matter of life or death. When a storm struck the vessel in the middle of the Atlantic, there was no time for democratic debates or decision committees. A single voice had to be heard, a single mind had to command, and everyone else had to obey without question. But here lies the first mystery. How did this rigid structure simultaneously allow men of humble origins to rise to the top? The maritime power pyramid began at its base with the cabin boys between 12 and 16 years old who joined as servants. Many were orphans from the streets of Lisbon, Seville, or Cadiz. Others were children of poor families who saw the sea as their only chance for social ascent. These boys performed the most basic tasks: cleaning the deck, distributing water, caring for live animals kept as food. They slept in cramped hammocks in the hold, ate the worst cuts of salted meat, and were constantly exposed to the mistreatment of more experienced sailors. But here's something fascinating. Even in that lowest position, differentiation was already apparent. Some cabin boys were protected by influential sailors, others showed special skills that caught the officers' attention. There were those who quickly learned to read the stars, others who developed a keen instinct to predict weather changes. And there were those who simply survived when others died, a quality valued above all else in the harsh ocean environment. Above the cabin boys were the ordinary sailors, men who had already proven their worth on at least one full voyage. They mastered basic navigation techniques. They knew how to handle sails, were familiar with essential knots, could identify different types of clouds and winds. But even among them, there were invisible subdivisions to the casual observer. Some sailors were specialists in ship carpentry, able to patch holes in the hull during a storm. Others excelled in working with ropes and sails. Some possessed artillery knowledge, essential when the ship had to defend itself from pirates or privateers. Here we find the first real rung of the hierarchical ladder, the boatswain, contramester. This man was responsible for supervising the work of all sailors, ensuring that the officers' orders were obeyed and maintaining discipline on board. But the boatswain was more than a supervisor. He was often the link between the common crew and the senior officers. He knew intimately every man under his command, understood their strengths and weaknesses, and often served as the captain's informal advisor on matters related to crew morale. But how did an ordinary sailor become a boatswain? Here we begin, to unravel the hidden mechanisms of maritime social mobility. Technical competence alone was not enough, though it was fundamental. Something more subtle was required: the ability to lead desperate men in extreme situations. A boatswain needed to identify when the crew was on the brink of mutiny, know when to be firm and when to show understanding, and maintain order without provoking revolt. Constant observation was another crucial factor. Senior officers were always evaluating the men under their command, looking for those who demonstrated initiative, courage, and practical intelligence. A sailor who could solve complex problems during a storm, who stayed calm when others panicked, who showed unquestionable loyalty. This man would be remembered when promotion opportunities arose. Above the boatswain, the hierarchy became more complex and politicized. The pilot was perhaps the most mysterious of these mid-level positions. Responsible for navigation itself, he needed to master knowledge that seemed almost magical to most crew members. He could read the stars as others read books, determine the ship's position in the seemingly endless ocean, and foresee storms by observing subtle changes in the behavior of seabirds. Many pilots guarded their knowledge like state secrets. They possessed handwritten nautical charts passed from master to apprentice, containing information about ocean currents, dangerous sandbanks, and safe ports on hostile coasts. Some even used secret codes in their notes, fearing their knowledge might be stolen by rivals. This aura of mystery contributed to their prestige, but also made them isolated and often mistrusted figures. What few know is that many pilots began their careers as simple cabin boys. Navigation in the 16th century was a science learned mainly through practical experience. A sharp-minded young man with a good memory could absorb knowledge by observing experienced pilots over several voyages. Some were formally accepted as apprentices. Others simply paid attention and asked intelligent questions at the right moments. But there was a darker aspect to this rise. Nautical knowledge was power, and power always aroused envy and conspiracy. It was not uncommon for experienced pilots to accidentally fall overboard during the night, especially when there were suspicions that they were about to be replaced by younger, more ambitious candidates. Competition for these positions was fierce, and the methods were not always honorable. Among the senior officers, we find even more complex and politically savvy figures. The ship's master was responsible for all technical aspects of the vessel: its maintenance, necessary repairs, distribution of supplies, and the organization of cargo spaces. It was a position that demanded not only technical knowledge, but also administrative and diplomatic skills. The master had to negotiate with merchants in the ports, oversee the loading of valuable goods, and ensure that supplies lasted the entire voyage. Interestingly, many masters came from artisanal backgrounds on land: carpenters, blacksmiths, small merchants who had decided to try their luck at sea. They brought practical knowledge that was extremely valuable on board, but needed to quickly learn the peculiarities of maritime life. Some adapted magnificently. Others discovered that the sea was a more hostile and unpredictable environment than they had imagined. The position of master also offered unique opportunities for enrichment. With privileged access to the cargo, some managed to conduct small side businesses, buying and selling goods on their own account. Naturally, this had to be done with extreme discretion, as cargo theft was punished very harshly. But those who skillfully navigated the line between legality and illegality could accumulate small fortunes over several voyages. Then we reach the top of the hierarchy, the captain. But here the situation becomes truly fascinating, because not all captains arrived at this position by the same path. There were basically three types of captains in the 16th century, each with a different trajectory and distinct powers. The first type was the captain owner, men from noble families or wealthy merchants who owned their own ships. These rarely started as simple sailors. They bought their vessels, hired crews, and commanded commercial or exploratory expeditions. Their power derived from ownership and money, not necessarily from maritime experience. Many were competent administrators and strategists, but heavily relied on the experience of their subordinate officers for the technical aspects of navigation. The second type was the military captain, officers appointed by the crown to command official expeditions. They could come from nobility or families of professional military men. Their authority derived from royal appointment, and they carried official documents granting them absolute jurisdiction over their vessels. They were responsible not only for navigation, but also for diplomatic and military matters when necessary. But the third type is the one that interests us most, the captain who had risen from the lowest rungs of the maritime hierarchy. These men, who began as cabin boys or ordinary sailors, represent the most extraordinary stories of social mobility of the era. How did they manage this seemingly impossible climb? The answer is not simple because it involved a rare combination of factors. First, exceptional technical competence. A man aspiring to absolute command had to master not only navigation, but also administration, diplomacy, military strategy, and human psychology. He needed to understand ship carpentry, artillery, commercial negotiation, and basic medicine. It was a skill set few could gather. Second, opportunity. Many extraordinary promotions happened in crisis situations. When a captain died during a voyage, when senior officers were lost in storms or pirate attacks, when disease decimated the command hierarchy. In these situations, the man who took control and saved the expedition gained not only recognition, but also legitimacy to claim command positions on future voyages. Third, political protection. Even the most competent sailors needed influential patrons to secure important commands. This meant carefully building relationships over years, demonstrating unquestionable loyalty, and sometimes performing favors beyond normal professional obligations. Some gained such protection through strategic marriages, others through services rendered at critical moments. But there was also a factor rarely mentioned in official records: exceptional personality. Commanding desperate men in extreme situations required a rare combination of charisma, intelligence, courage, and calculated cruelty. The most successful captains were those who could inspire fanatical loyalty in some men, respectful fear in others, and always keep everyone uncertain about their true intentions. Everyday life on board constantly revealed these power dynamics. During meals, hierarchy was rigidly observed. The captain ate alone in his cabin, served by the most trusted cabin boys. Officers had their own table with superior quality food. Ordinary sailors shared their meals in small groups, supervised by the boatswain. This separation was not just symbolic. It reflected real differences in the quality and quantity of food available at each hierarchical level. During storms, when all normal social protocols were suspended, a different hierarchy emerged based purely on competence and courage. An ordinary sailor, who managed to carry out crucial repairs during a crisis, could temporarily give orders to senior officers. A cabin boy, who showed exceptional composure, could be instantly promoted to positions of greater responsibility. These crisis situations were often when the most spectacular rises were forged. Justice on board also reflected and reinforced the hierarchy. The captain had absolute power of life and death over all crew members, but this power was exercised differently, depending on the social position of the offender. An officer who committed a crime would be judged more carefully, perhaps sent back to shore to face a formal tribunal. An ordinary sailor committing the same offense could be punished immediately, sometimes with extreme severity. But here we discover something surprising. This apparent injustice sometimes worked in favor of men from humble origins. When an ordinary sailor demonstrated exceptional valor, his modest background could be seen as an advantage. There were no complicated social expectations, no influential families to consider, no established reputations to protect. Our captain could promote a competent man of humble origin without having to navigate complex political considerations. Women, officially excluded from this world, sometimes managed to indirectly influence these hierarchies. Wives of wealthy merchants who financed expeditions could suggest or veto captain appointments. Daughters of shipowners who married promising officers could accelerate their rise. And there were cases, rare but documented, of women who disguised themselves as men and secured positions aboard ships, some even reaching command roles before their identities were discovered. Religion also played a complex role in these dynamics. Officially, all Christian ships maintained chaplains who performed regular religious services, but religiosity on board was often more superstitious than doctrinal. Sailors who demonstrated knowledge of secret arts, astronomical navigation, weather forecasting, folk medicine, could earn respect and influence that transcended their official rank in the hierarchy. Some of the most influential men on board were those who could serve as intermediaries between different hierarchical levels. The barber surgeon, for example, was technically a mid-level position, but his ability to save lives earned him respect from everyone, from cabin boys to captains. Experienced cooks, who knew how to keep food palatable during long voyages, could exert surprising influence over crew morale. Communication between different ranks was strictly controlled, but there were always informal channels. Information about route changes, supply problems, conflicts between officers, all circulated through complex networks of rumors and confidences. Smart sailors learned to navigate these information networks, using them to anticipate opportunities and avoid dangers. When they finally returned to their home ports, these men who had spent months living in an extremely rigid hierarchical society had to readapt to land-based social structures. Some discovered that their maritime experiences had given them skills and perspectives that made them valuable on land. Others found they could no longer adjust to life ashore and repeatedly returned to the sea. The fortunes accumulated during these voyages could be substantial, but also extremely volatile. A man might return from a trip as one of the richest men in his city, only to lose everything on the next voyage. This economic instability created a particular culture among sailors, a mix of extreme generosity in times of plenty and desperate frugality during hard periods. Relationships formed during these journeys often lasted for decades. Men who had served together in life or death situations maintained loyalties that transcended social class differences. A successful captain often preferred to work with familiar crews, even if it meant paying higher wages. An experienced sailor might follow a competent officer through multiple job changes. Thus, the hierarchy on 16th century ships reveals itself as something far more complex and dynamic than a simple pyramid of power. It was a system that, paradoxically, managed to be simultaneously extremely rigid and surprisingly flexible. It maintained the order necessary for survival under extreme conditions, but also offered opportunities for social ascent that were practically impossible on land. The sailor who became captain was not just a theoretical possibility. It was a documented reality in hundreds of cases. These men, who began by cleaning decks and ended up commanding fleets, represent one of the most dramatic forms of social mobility in human history. Their stories remind us that even in the most hierarchical systems, exceptional merit and opportunity can create unexpected paths to power and influence. And perhaps this is the most fascinating lesson of that era, that in the moments when humanity ventured into the most unknown and dangerous territories, traditional social structures had to adapt or break. In the middle of the ocean, far from all the controls and conventions of terrestrial society, a brutal but real meritocracy emerged, where competence and courage could literally raise a man from the depths to the heights.